My painting is completely dry, and now it's time to put in the trees. So I came up with this idea of using little twigs to play around with the placement of my trees before I paint them in, and I think it's going to work rather well. I can move these around and see you know, just how I want to have those in my painting. So let's start with this tree, and I'm going to also start out with just a kind of a fat little script liner. This is a Simply Simmons number 3, and I have mixed up some dark greens using Undersea Green by Daniel Smith, a black, just a standard lamp black, and I put in a little bit of burnt orange and carbazole violet, just a touch, so that I can bring out some of the violet shades in the sky here, and just press in and pull up. Alright, and let's come over to this side and put in another little branch, and we're going to leave that just for a few seconds so I get a chance to look at it and see where I want to put other branches, if any at all. And I'm going to come to the bottom of this tree and just push in to the bottom and pull my brush sideways, and that's going to give me the shadow for the underside of my tree trunk. Clean my brush off and do it again, and that's looking pretty good. So let's come over now and do this one. I'm also going to use my darkest value here, and we'll do the same thing. I'm going to push and just pull up. Reload the brush. We have plenty of dark pigment, and we're going to put a thinner one right next to it here. Okay, let's leave that just for a moment. We're just getting placement of the trees right now. We need to get the shadows in underneath before the paint starts to dry. So I'm going to clean my brush off, clear water, and just push into the bottoms of these trunks using the side of my brush, and don't overdo it. Okay, I don't really want a hard edge, so I'm going to clean my brush off again and just come down to the bottom of that shadow and soften that edge. Alright, and the next thing we'll do, now for this tree that's a little more distant than the rest, I'm going to, this is the one where I'll add a little bit of the Prussian blue to the mix, and that will push back this tree into the distance a little bit. So we'll do the same thing. We're going to push down and pull up on that tree. Let's throw in a couple more right next to it. Let's get a limb going there. And let's go ahead and get our shadow in. The shadow also helps to define the land, the slope of the land. So that looks rather nice. So now I have 3 groupings of trees, and I think I'll let that dry for a few minutes before I go back in and put details on. Okay, so I'm switching over to my Da Vinci Cosmotop spin brush number 4. It's a little finer than the liner that I was using to put in the tree trunks. And now we're going to put in a few thinner branches on our trees. And I'm holding my brush very far back so that I can get these little kind of scraggly, craggly tree branches. Sometimes I'll start from the top and come down, and sometimes I will start from the bottom and go up, just for variety. Let's see, let's have one coming off this way. Don't be afraid to overlap. The bottoms are always going to be thicker than the tops. And I like to go back in and just round off where a branch comes in. And we're going to darken the bottom part of the trunk. I want to be careful not to cover up the little scraggly, craggly parts. Little bumpy parts of the tree. And let's put a few make sure that your branches are connecting to something. And the bottom part of the branch will always be thicker than the top part of the branch. Even as they get smaller and finer, make sure that you have your perspective right. So I'm thickening up the bottom. And rounding off where the branches connect. Put a few bumps just here and there, a few bumps and buds. Okay, if you feel yourself losing perspective, it's a good time to stop and move to a different part of the painting. Okay, so I'm noticing this tree in the background, since I've darkened this one, that's very nicely been pushed to the background a little bit. I'm noticing that this part of the trunk here is looking a little bare, so I'm going to go back in and let's give that a rather dark partner. Okay, so we have one coming around in the front and one kind of going into the back part of this tree trunk. We'll give it more of a rounded shape and then just come in and add a couple of extra branches. Remember, thick on the bottom, thin on the top. Okay, I like the shape so far. Take your time with this, and if you're not sure about a branch, just hold off, look at it, maybe move to another part of the painting and come back. If you round that little crook right there, it will give your trees a much nicer shape. Come down and just soften the edge on the bottom here again. We don't want any hard edges on the bottom of the trees. And let's come down and fix the shape of these bottom branches that you really can see the most in this tree. Pretty much what I'm looking for there. Okay, let's come over and finish up our last tree on the other side. Clean my brush off and hit the bottom of that trunk again. And just let that blend off. And you see it's really starting to give that land some form. We have some little rolling hills now. Okay, if we're careful to remember that things are thicker at the bottom than they are at the top, you really can't go wrong with trees. And we're going to let that dry and come back and put a few bits of foliage on the trees. For the foliage, I'm using a mixture of undersea green, black, and I put in a little bit of purple lake just to give a little bit of a glow to the foliage. And let's start with this tree right here. And I would like to start with the top outer branches first. So we look for a group of branches, and I'm using a Princeton Select, just a little filbert grainer, and if you can see the edge of this brush is very ragged, and it's going to give me some nice marks for foliage here. The detail on the outside of the foliage is more important than the detail on the inside. Now I'm going to go back into my purple lake and just highlight a few of these areas. Okay, and less is more. You can always add, but it's very hard to lift out these leaves, so do just a little bit and then step back, take a look, and come back in. Alright, so let's come over and be careful not to confuse the tree in the foreground with the tree in the background. So here's another group of branches. We're looking for those thin groups of branches, and work in the direction of the shape that you want your leaves to be in. So this is sort of like just a little umbrella shape. And go back into my purple lake, and let's put a few little highlights. In that area. Alright, now I'm going to go back into some very dark black, and let's pick up just a little bit of brown tone with my raw umber, and let's come into the middle part of this tree and find an area where there's some branches. We want this to be darker because it's closest to us, and it will round out this tree, give it some depth. Okay, and then just a few at the top. And if your paint begins to dry, don't fight with it. Stop and mix it up a little before you continue. It'll make life a lot easier than trying to work with paint that is drying and fighting with you. Okay, we're looking for contrast here, and we want to let those light, we don't want to cover up all that yellow, we want that light to shine through. And actually, when you see that happening, we want to contrast that with some very dark pigment near it or next to it without covering it up. Okay, so let me get a nice dark contrast here. And I like those little leaf shapes, so I want to make sure that I don't go back and accidentally cover those up. And we'll put a few pulling down. Okay, and that is going to be it for that tree. Alright, now I'm going to go back and get a little more of that blue. You can even use like a verditer blue just to add some shadow leaves into that background tree. Alright, so I've got a mixture with blue, and I'm going to find those background branches and just throw in a few. indications of foliage in that tree that's hiding in the background there. It's not going to be as defined as the trees in the foreground. Just make sure you have a couple of interesting brush marks on the edges. Okay, and let that go and dry. And now it's time to do this large tree, which is the tree that, this one is the closest. This is not too far behind it, but this is the tree that we need to have the darkest values on. So I need to mix some more paint. I'm going to mix up some more black and undersea green. Let's start at the top of our canopy, and we've got little umbrella shapes. Be careful not to cover up your the interesting foliage shapes. We don't want them to all blend together. Okay, and now we're going to clean off our brush, go in for a little more purple lake, go into the black and green mixture, and look for another system of tree branches. Okay, we're thinking, we're moving the brush in the direction of the shape of this canopy of trees, and I'm going to go in a little bit more in the center with a darker value toward the center, and on the underside is where the darker value goes. Okay, and whenever you get a happy accident with a brush stroke, just be careful that you don't go back in and accidentally cover it up. And let's go for one more grouping. Let's come down in this area, starting from the center, and I've got a little bit of a later value in my paint, so this will push this grouping to the back side of the tree, if that makes sense. Okay, and I think we can probably put just a few peeking out from the back side. I want to pay attention to my shape here. They are falling down, so I want to make sure I have that. And you can see the lay of the land goes this way, so I'm kind of having my foliage follow the lay of the land. And we can let that dry, and when we come back, if we need to add a few darker values here and there, we can do that. But let's let it dry and see where we are. Okay, so my painting is dry, and I have this little kind of coffee colored mat, and I thought it would look nice on here, so let's see. Now if I put the mat like right in the center of my picture, it doesn't look that great, but if I crop it a little bit, so that I can feature the best parts of the painting, which I think is this light that's coming through the trees in this area with the purple lake. So if I move my mat just a little bit, look at how much prettier that is. So I don't want these ugly edges up here like that. But if I move this down, let me move the mat down so you can see. Okay, I don't want those ugly white edges up at the top, but if I move this over and just catch all of that pink and move it down so that I can catch the sun in the foreground hitting the kind of that little rolling hill there. Let's move it over as far as we can to catch as much of the light on the right hand side as we can. And you see how that actually changes the whole dynamic of this painting. So cropping is important when you are thinking about framing your painting. You want to highlight the best parts of your painting, right? I think that is probably where we will leave this one, and all we need to do at this point is sign. So when we sign paintings, I usually just use my first two initials and then my last name, and I always use a number 1 micron pen. You can choose your color. I usually stick to a black or a brown. And I'm going to make sure that my painting is not going to move as I sign. So I've cropped where I want it. Now this area here is an important part of the picture, so I don't want to cover that up with my signature. But I want to find a place that is light enough that you'll be able to see it. So I'm going to come over here to the bottom right. You kind of want to stick to either the bottom right or the bottom left. And on this one, I'm going to stick to the bottom right. And I'm going to give my frame enough room that I can move it slightly. I'm not going to be moving it a whole lot. And I want to make sure that, of course, you're not going to run off. So you can give yourself plenty of space. And I'm going to sign right here. And we have a finished picture, and I think that turned out very nicely. So thanks for hanging out with me today, painting this little landscape with some trees in some bright fall colors with a lot of contrast. And I hope you'll give this one a try. And thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Remember to give me a thumbs up, a like, or a share. It really does help people find the page. And I'll see you next time.